before the silence from the story, when heaven called home. The day began like any other, soft sunlight filtering through white linen curtains, the smell of brewed coffee floating lazily through the kitchen, and the sound of Michael's humming spilling from the hallway. He always hummed while shaving. Never a complete song, just bits and pieces of whatever hymn lived rent-free in his heart that morning. "Babe," Elena called out, stirring sugar into her cup, "if you're gonna hum, at least sing the words right." Michael laughed from the bathroom, his voice muffled by toothpaste. "Then you come and sing with me, Miss Choir Leader." She rolled her eyes, but her heart smiled. That was Michael, warm, playful, impossible to stay mad at. He walked out moments later, shirt half-buttoned, smelling of aftershave and fresh soap. "Come here," he said, opening his arms wide. Elena stepped into his embrace, resting her head against his chest as he rocked her gently. For a moment, time paused. The clock ticked. The kettle whistled. Birds sang outside the kitchen window. And everything was perfect. They'd been married 5 years, and though life hadn't given them everything they wanted, it had given them peace. They lived in Nairobi, then a modest apartment on the west side, filled with plants, framed photos, and music. On Sunday mornings, worship songs echoed from their speakers while they cooked breakfast together, her pancakes, his scrambled eggs. They'd dance barefoot on the tiled floor, laughing when he'd step on her toes. "You're supposed to follow my lead." "I'm trying," he'd grin, "but your hips are leading me astray." And just like that, laughter would drown the morning. They were the couple people loved to love. Friends often said, "You two make marriage look easy." But it wasn't easy, it was intentional. Every prayer, every act of forgiveness, every late-night conversation they built their love with hands trembling in faith. At night, they'd sit on their balcony, sipping tea and planning their future. "One day," Michael said, "we'll open that cafe in Cape Town. You'll do the I'll handle the coffee, and we'll name it E. and Eames Haven," she replied, eyes twinkling. "No," he chuckled. "We'll call it Grace Caf, because that's what we live on." They had dreams, a trip to Santorini, a house near the coast, children who would know God before the world. Life was good. Life was blessed until it wasn't. It began subtly. A cough that lingered longer than usual. A fever that came and went. At first, they brushed it off. "It's just the weather," he said, "probably flu." But when the cough deepened, when the nights got longer, when sleep became a struggle, Lena's laughter began to fade. Doctors' visits replaced date nights, hospital corridors replaced candlelit dinners, and the man who once danced in the kitchen now sat weakly in a chair, his breath shallow, his eyes tired. Still, she believed. She held his hand and whispered scriptures over him. "By his stripes, you are healed." She cooked, prayed, and sang softly beside his bed, because that's what faith looked like to her, doing even when you're breaking. One night, she woke to the sound of machines beeping irregularly. Nurses rushed in, voices quick and tense. "Ma'am, please wait outside." She wanted to scream, to fight, to stay beside him. But the door closed, and silence filled her ears louder than any sound could. Hours later, a doctor walked out, eyes low, voice heavy. "Mrs. Moy, we did everything we could." Her body froze. The world blurred. The walls felt too close. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. She whispered, "No, please, check again. Please." But there was no again. The mug she'd been holding slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. Coffee spread like a stain across the white tiles, just like the color draining from her world. In that moment, time stopped. The sun was still shining outside, but for Elena, everything turned gray. She went home that night to an empty bed. The pillow beside her was still indebted, holding his scent. She buried her face in it and sobbed until her voice broke. And when she could cry no more, she just stared into the dark, whispering, "God, why him? Why now?" There was no answer. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, mocking her with reminders that time was still moving, even though her heart was not. For the first time in years, their home was quiet. No music, no laughter, no humming in the morning, just silence. Heavy, merciless silence. And that's where her story of healing would one day begin, but for now, it was just grief. Raw, lonely, breath-stealing grief. The sky was too blue, the air too calm, as if heaven itself didn't understand how it felt to lose someone. Elena stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a simple black dress. Her fingers trembled as she fixed her necklace, the one Michael had given her on their 3rd anniversary. To my light, it read. The engraving blurred through her tears. Her friend, Anita, gently touched her shoulder. Elena, everyone's waiting downstairs. Elena nodded, though she didn't move. Her lips parted, but no words came out. What was there to say when language had abandoned her heart? The drive to the church was silent. Every sound felt too loud, the engine, the tires against the gravel, even her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. As the car stopped outside the sanctuary, she saw the crowd gathered: friends, co-workers, church members, all dressed in black, faces heavy with sorrow. Some hugged her, some whispered condolences. But every touch felt distant, every word meaningless. The worship team played softly, "It Is Well With My Soul," and for the first time, that song didn't feel true. She sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly together, eyes locked on the casket. The mahogany wood gleamed under the church lights, beautiful, polished, final. "That's where my husband is," she thought. In that box. The thought hit her like a wave, cold and suffocating. The pastor spoke of faith, of God's will, of eternal rest. But the words floated over her like clouds she couldn't touch. She wasn't angry, not yet. Just empty. When it was time to give her tribute, Anita squeezed her hand. "You don't have to, Elena," she whispered. But Elena stood anyway. Her knees felt weak, her throat tight. She walked to the podium, looked at the crowd, then at the casket. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then, her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Michael wasn't just my husband. He was my home." Silence filled the room. She took a shaky breath and continued. "He had this way of finding light, even in the darkest days. He'd tell me, 'Lena, God doesn't waste pain. Even this, He'll use.' I didn't know those words would one day become my anchor." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked upward. "If love could have kept you here, you'd still be sitting next to me, humming through the sermon like you always did." A soft ripple of laughter broke through the tears in the room. Ivan Ingrieve, his memory brought warmth. When the service ended, they drove to the cemetery. The sun was now high, casting long shadows on the green grass. She stood by the grave as they lowered the casket, her hands clutching a white rose. "Till we meet again," she whispered, dropping it onto the wood. As the soil began to cover him, reality sank deeper with every thud. Each shovel of earth was a goodbye she didn't want to say. Later, back home, the house felt like a museum of their love, full of memories, yet lifeless. His jacket hung by the door. His mug sat by the sink. His Bible, open on the nightstand, still marked at Psalm 34-80. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." She read it over and over, her tears staining the page, but it didn't feel real yet, just words on paper. That night, she lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, every second louder than the one before. At 2 a.m., she got up and walked to the balcony. The cold air hitting her face, she whispered into the night, "God, if you're close to the brokenhearted, then why do I feel so far from you?" A single tear rolled down her cheek. The city below sparkled with life, cars honking, lights flashing while her world stood still. And for the first time, she admitted it out loud. "I don't know how to live without him." The echo of her own voice was the only answer. But heaven was listening, because even in silence, God had already begun the work of mending her shattered soul, one invisible stitch at a time. The world didn't pause for her grief. That's what hurt the most. The morning after the funeral, sunlight still broke through the curtains. Birds still sang outside, and somewhere down the street, a neighbor laughed. It felt wrong that life could go on so loudly when hers had fallen so silent. Elena sat at the edge of the bed, still wearing Michael's old t-shirt. It smelled faintly of his cologne, musky, warm, comforting. She pulled it close, as though fabric could fill the emptiness he left behind. The first few days blurred together: calls, condolences, casseroles she never ate. People came and went, their sympathy soft but shallow. Everyone said the same thing: he's in a better place. But she wanted him here. At night, she'd catch herself setting out 2 cups for tea before realizing there was no him anymore. Her body moved out of habit, but her soul refused to accept the change. One afternoon, she wandered into his study. The faint smell of paper and ink still lingered. His Bible lay open beside a half-written sermon note. He had been preparing to preach on faith in the fire. Now, she was the one walking through it. She traced her fingers over his handwriting, bold, neat, sure. When you can't see his hand, trust his heart. Her lips trembled. "But I don't trust anything right now," she whispered. Tears blurred her vision until the words on the page dissolved. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the floor, clutching the Bible to her chest. "Why, God, you could have healed him. You could have done something." Her voice broke. "I served you. We prayed. We believed. And you took him anyway." Her sobs echoed through the empty room. For hours, she stayed there, broken in body and spirit, until exhaustion stole her strength and she fell asleep on the cold floor, still clutching his Bible. Days became weeks. The phone stopped ringing. Friends stopped visiting. Life resumed for everyone else. Elena tried to go back to work, a design firm in the city. The first day, she walked in wearing her brave face, her shoulders stiff, her smile forced, but every corner of the office seemed to whisper his name. He used to call her during lunch breaks just to ask what she was eating. Now, even her ringtone was a ghost. During a meeting, her manager mentioned a client named Michael. The name alone undid her. Her chest tightened, her breath caught, and tears she had fought for weeks spilled freely in front of everyone. Apologies murmured around her, but she couldn't hear them. She stood abruptly, whispered, "I'm sorry," and rushed out of the building. On the street, people stared as she walked aimlessly under the afternoon sun. The city buzzed horns, chatter, music from cafes, but she felt like a shadow moving through someone else's world. That evening she sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink, his favorite colors. He used to say sunsets were God's way of showing off. Now, they just hurt to look at. Still, something inside her stirred, faint, fragile, but real. A whisper that she couldn't quite explain. Not from outside, but from within. "I'm still here." She blinked, unsure if it was her imagination. Then she remembered the verse he loved, the one he always quoted when things got hard. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23. For her hands trembled as she whispered the words out loud. For the first time since the funeral, she let them reach her heart. And though tears still streamed down her face, something began to shift. It wasn't healing yet, but it was hopey small, flickering, like a candle refusing to die out in the wind. Elena closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered, "If you're still here, Lord, I'll try to be, too." Outside, the city lights flickered on, bright, unwavering, and in that moment, for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. The human heart has limits. You can only hold pain for so long before it spills. Weeks turned into months, but for Elena, time had no meaning anymore. Days blurred into nights. Nights dissolved into silence. The calendar changed, but her world didn't. She stopped answering calls, stopped going to church, even stopped praying. Everywhere she looked, there was something that reminded her of Michael. His toothbrush still beside hers, his shoes by the door, his favorite mug on the shelf. She couldn't bring herself to move anything. It felt like if she kept everything in place, he might somehow come back. Friends tried. Anita showed up often, dropping off food she never ate. "Elena, please, you can't keep doing this," she'd say softly. But Elena would just smile weakly and say, "I'm fine. Those were the two most dangerous words she had learned to hide behind. One Saturday evening, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone, vacations, birthdays, silly selfies. Every picture felt like a knife twist, but she couldn't stop. She played a video, their last trip together to Monaco. In the clip, Michael laughed as he filmed her dancing on the beach. "Look at you, Mrs. Mwangi. My sunshine? Stop recording," she giggled, tossing sand at him. Too late. The world must see your beauty. The sound of his laughter filled the empty room, echoing against the walls. She pressed the phone to her chest and broke down. "Why did you take him, God? We were happy. We had plans." Her sobs came in waves, uncontrollable. She slid to the floor, her hands gripping her hair, tears flooding her face. It wasn't a graceful kind of crying. It was raw, primal, desperate. "You could have healed him. You healed others. Why not him?" She screamed into the pillow until her throat burned. The kind of scream that doesn't just come from pain, but from loss of purpose. For the first time, she whispered words she never thought she'd say. "Maybe you forgot about me." The silence that followed was deafening. That night, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat in darkness, staring at the ceiling, her body trembling. She felt empty, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left only shadows. Around 3 a.m., she decided to leave the apartment. She wrapped herself in a shawl and walked barefoot down the street. The city was asleep. Street lights cast long, lonely shadows. She walked past the cafe they used to visit, past the park where they'd taken evening walks. When she reached the small chapel near the corner, the one they used to attend occasionally, she stopped. The doors were locked, but she sat on the steps. The stone was cold beneath her, but it felt grounding somehow. She looked up at the sky, vast, dark, full of silent stars. "Do you even see me anymore?" she whispered. "Because I can't feel you. I can't hear you. And I don't know how to keep going." The tears came again, softer this time. She leaned her head against the chapel door and closed her eyes. And in that stillness, that fragile, hollow moment, something shifted. It wasn't a voice, not out loud. It was like a warmth rising quietly inside her chest, like the faintest whisper of peace. Not a solution, not an explanation, just a presence. "I never left." The words weren't audible, but they filled her. Her breath caught. For the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. She began to sob again, not out of anger this time, but out of release. "You're still here," she whispered, "after everything." The wind stirred gently, brushing against her cheek like a touch. The night didn't change, the stars didn't blink brighter, but something inside her did. A seed had been planted, tiny, invisible, but alive. As dawn broke, painting the horizon gold, Elena rose from the chapel steps, exhausted but lighter. For the first time, she wanted to go home, not to mourn, but to rest. When she opened her apartment door, the first thing she saw was Michael's Bible on the table, still open to Psalm 34 minutes and 18 seconds. She ran her fingers over the words again. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." "And this Chimi," she whispered, "then stay close, Lord, because I'm still breaking." It wasn't a prayer of victory yet, but it was a prayer of surrender. And sometimes, that's where true healing begins. The morning after that night at the chapel, Elena woke up differently. Not happy, no, not yet, but calm. The kind of calm that comes after a storm, when the air still smells of rain. She sat on her bed and stared at the morning light spilling through the curtains. It felt kind. For months, she had dreaded mornings because they meant facing another day without Michael. But this morning felt softer, as if the world was whispering, "You're still here." She got out of bed and made tea, the first cup she had made for herself in weeks. She sat quietly, hands wrapped around the mug, feeling the warmth. It was simple, ordinary, but somehow sacred. For the first time, she said out loud, "Thank you for another day." Her voice cracked, but it was a start. That afternoon, she picked up a notebook, one she had bought months ago to journal her prayers. The pages were empty, but that day, she wrote, "Dear God, I don't understand everything, but I want to trust you again. Help me see you in small things, in light, in people, in peace. I'm tired of fighting this alone." When she finished, she felt something loosen inside her like an anchor being lifted. Days passed. Elena began to take short walks again. She'd stop by the park where she and Michael used to go, not to cry this time, but to breathe. The flowers were blooming, again, purple, yellow, white, and for the first time, she noticed how beautiful they looked under the sunlight. Sometimes, she'd catch herself smiling at strangers. Sometimes, she'd even laugh at a memory. Healing didn't come like a wave, it came in whispers, in small, fragile moments. One Sunday, after almost 3 months away, she returned to church. She sat at the back, heart pounding. The worship team was singing softly, "It is well with my soul." She couldn't sing. She just sat there, tears streaming silently down her face. But this Chimi, the tears weren't angry. They were cleansing. The pastor spoke that morning from Isaiah 61:3. He will give them beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, and praise for despair. The words pierced her heart. She whispered, "Beauty for ashes, joy for mourning. Is that really possible, Lord?" As the service ended, a little girl, menos maybe 6 or 7 years old, walked up to her. She had bright eyes and held out a tiny flower she'd picked from outside. "Jesus said to give this to you." The girl said simply. Elena froze. Her throat tightened as she took the flower, a white daisy. Michael's favorite. Tears filled her eyes again, but this Chimi they came with a trembling smile. She whispered under her breath, "You really do see me." That small moment became her turning point. From then, she began to write every day, little reflections, gratitude lists, prayers, and though her heart still ached, she started noticing how grace showed up in the kindness of a friend, in the warmth of sunlight, in laughter she thought she'd never hear again. One night, as she sat by her window journaling, she wrote something she didn't plan to. "Michael's gone, but love isn't. Maybe love never really dies, it just changes form. Maybe healing isn't forgetting, it's learning to live again." And that night, she finally slept without tears. The next morning, she opened her Bible and found herself in Psalm 32:5. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." She smiled and whispered, "Then let morning come, Lord." That was the day she decided to start volunteering at a grief support group, not because she was fully healed, but because she knew what it felt like to be broken and alone. And maybe, just maybe, her healing could help someone else's begin. The first time Elena walked into the community center for the grief support meeting, she almost turned back. Her palms were sweating, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure she was ready to face other people, as pain when hers still whispered in every heartbeat. But then she remembered the daisy, the one that little girl had given her in church. It had dried now, pressed between the pages of her journal. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and whispered, "If I can help just one person feel less alone, then this pain will mean something." She stepped inside. The room was warm and softly lit, filled with quiet faces, each one carrying a story, a loss, a hole that love had once filled. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated. Then, in a trembling voice, she said, "I lost my husband, Michael, and for a long time, I thought I'd lost myself too. But I'm here because I believe we can still find light, even in the dark." Silence followed, not heavy, but sacred. Someone nodded, someone wiped a tear, and that was the moment she realized her pain had a purpose. After that day, Elena began showing up every week. She'd listen, hold hands, pass tissues, and sometimes just sit in silence with others who couldn't find words. There was one woman, Ruth, who had lost her teenage son. One day after the session, Ruth said softly, "You speak like someone who's met God in the ruins." Elena smiled weakly. "Maybe I have," she said. "He found me when I had nothing left to give." That evening, she stayed behind to help clean up. As she was stacking chairs, a man approached her, tall, gentle eyes, and a kindness that felt familiar. His name was Adrian. He had lost his sister in a car accident 2 years before. They talked, awkwardly at first, then easily. It wasn't romantic, not then. It was two souls, each carrying a bruise, finding comfort in recognition. He told her, "Grief is strange, isn't it? You think it's a wound, but it becomes part of your skin." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, it stops bleeding, but it never fully disappears." Days turned into weeks. The group meetings became more than therapy. They became a quiet garden where healing took root. Laughter began to bloom again, even amid tears. And Elena noticed how life had a way of sneaking beauty into broken places. She started tending her backyard again, the one Michael had loved so much. She planted daisies, the flower that had marked her turning point. Every morning, she'd water them, whispering prayers over each bud. Sometimes, Adrian would visit, helping her plant or simply sitting in silence with her. They'd talk about faith, loss, and what it meant to start again when your heart still remembers the past. One evening, as the sky turned gold, Adrian said, "Maybe healing isn't moving on. Maybe it's moving forward, carrying love with us." Elena looked at the flowers swaying gently in the breeze and whispered, "Yes. And maybe God grows new things in the soil of what we thought was ruined." That night, she opened her journal again and wrote, "It's strange. I thought I'd never feel joy again. But airy I am, smiling at daisies, laughing at stories, seeing God in faces I once overlooked. Maybe this is what grace looks like, not perfect, not painless, but alive." She added a verse at the bottom. "He makes all things new." Revelation 21:5. And for the first time since Michael's passing, she whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for letting me live again." As the weeks went by, she began speaking at small events, churches, women's groups, even schools, about grief, hope, and faith. Each time she spoke, her voice trembled less. Each time she saw more faces lift, more tears turn into soft smiles. People began calling her the woman who carried peace. But Elena knew it wasn't her peace. It was God's peace, borrowed and shared. One day, as she stood in her blooming garden, watching the daisies sway, Adrian handed her a small envelope. Inside was a card that read, "To the woman who taught me that broken hearts can still bloom." Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but gratitude. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "You see, Michael, love didn't end. It just changed form." It began with laughter, a soft, unexpected laugh that escaped Elena's lips one sunny afternoon. She was sitting under the old oak tree in her garden, the one she and Michael had planted together during their first year of marriage. A butterfly landed on her journal, its wings patterned like stained glass. She giggled softly, watching it flutter away, and then she froze. She hadn't laughed, truly laughed, in over a year. The sound startled her, then warmed her. She looked up at the sky, tears filling her eyes, and whispered, "So this is what healing sounds like." The days that followed carried a new kind of rhythm. She still missed Michael, she always would, but the pain no longer swallowed her whole. It had become a quiet companion instead of a storm. She cooked again. She sang in the kitchen while stirring soup, sometimes out of tune, sometimes humming Michael's favorite hymn. Her friends noticed it too. During one Sunday gathering, her friend Naomi smiled and said, "You look different, Elena." Lighter somehow. Elena smiled. "Maybe I'm finally remembering how to live." At church, she joined the worship team again, something she never thought she'd do. The first time she held the microphone, her hands trembled, but when she sang it as well with my soul, she felt a peace so deep it moved her to tears. She wasn't singing to impress. She was singing from a place of survival, a place of surrender. After the service, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes and said, "Your story gave me hope. I lost my fiancé last year, and I thought I'd never feel whole again. But hearing you sing, I think I can start to believe again." Elena hugged her tightly, and in that moment, she realized her healing was healing others. Her relationship with Adrian had deepened, though not in a romantic way. They had become kindred spirits, two people rebuilding their worlds brick by brick. One afternoon, as they were walking along the shore after a grief conference in Cape Town, he said, "You've changed, Elena. You're shining again." She smiled at the horizon. "I thought my light went out with him, but maybe God was just waiting to relight it in a new way." He nodded, picking up a seashell and handing it to her. Even broken shells still reflect the sun. She turned the shell over in her hand, its edges rough, its shape imperfect, yet glistening beautifully in the sunlight. She whispered, "Then I'll be that shell." Weeks later, she began volunteering at an orphanage in Greece. The laughter of the children filled her heart with a joy she didn't know she still possessed. They'd run up to her, calling her Mama Elena, tugging at her dress, showing her their drawings. One little boy, Nikos, handed her a crumpled paper one day. It was a stick figure of her holding hands with a man under a rainbow. He said, "That's you and your angel in heaven." Tears welled up. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "That's us." She pinned the drawing on her wall that night. In her journal, she wrote, "Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering with peace instead of pain. It's waking up and thanking God that I got to love even if it hurt to lose." Then she wrote the verse that had become her anchor. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34-80. She closed the journal, exhaled deeply, and smiled. The next morning, she woke up early and watched the sunrise from her balcony. The colors painted the sky in gold and pink, the same colors Michael had once said reminded him of heaven. She whispered into the wind, "You were right, love. Heaven does look like this." And for the first time, she didn't feel the ache of loss. She felt the warmth of eternity. That day, she decided to share her story online, a YouTube channel she titled When Heaven Called Home. She sat in front of the camera, nervous but ready, and said, "This isn't a story of loss. It's a story of love that outlived death. If you're hurting, I want you to know, God still writes beauty in broken chapters." The video reached thousands. Messages poured in from women across the world, widows, mothers, daughters, each saying, "Thank you for helping me breathe again." Elena read every comment, tears streaming down her face, whispering prayers over strangers she would never meet. As night fell, she went back to her garden one last time that day. The daisies she had planted were in full bloom, glowing white beneath the moonlight. She knelt beside them and prayed softly, "Lord, thank you for letting me live through the pain. Thank you for turning ashes into something beautiful. And thank you for letting joy return." A gentle breeze swept across the flowers, a whisper, a brush of peace. In her heart, she heard Michael's laughter, not in sorrow, but in love. And she smiled, because she knew heaven wasn't far. It was a quiet Saturday morning in late spring. The sun was soft, the air smelled of jasmine, and the world outside her window felt still like it was holding its breath. Elena sat at her writing desk, the same one Michael had bought her on their first anniversary. On top of it lay a fresh page of cream-colored stationery and a fountain pen, the one she hadn't used since his funeral. For months, she had felt something stirring in her heart, unfinished words, unspoken goodbyes. She had talked, prayed, cried, healed, but there was still something she needed to release. And so, she began to write. "My dearest Michael, I've tried to live bravely, you know. For a long time, I thought I needed to forget you in order to move on. But I've learned that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. You are still here in every daisy that blooms, in every song I sing, in every person I comfort. I wanted to tell you that I forgave you for leaving too soon. I know it wasn't your choice, but for a while, I blamed you for the empty chair, the quiet mornings, the echo in the hall. I forgive you, and I forgive myself for taking so long to let go of the pain." She paused, pressing her palm over her chest. The tears flowed easily now, not bitter, just cleansing. She smiled softly through them and kept writing. "I met some beautiful souls who helped me find my smile again. I started a little channel online, can you believe it? Me, the woman who once hated cameras. I tell people about grief, about God, about how love never really dies. And I've seen hearts heal through my story. Michael, isn't that just like God? Turning our brokenness into something that blesses others." The pen trembled in her hand as she continued. "There's this little boy at the orphanage, Nikos, who reminds me of your joy. He drew us under a rainbow, said that was me and my angel. And he was right. You'll always be my angel, watching, smiling, guiding quietly." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze lifting to the framed photos on the desk, their honeymoon in Santorini, laughter frozen in time. For the first time in years, she didn't feel that deep, aching pull. Instead, she felt warmth, a gentle, divine peace. She picked up her pen again. I don't know what heaven looks like, but I imagine it's filled with light. And when my time comes, I'll find you there, by the garden. Maybe with a cup of coffee in your hand, waiting, like you always did. Until then, I'll live fully, faithfully, fearlessly, because that's what you'd want. And because God has shown me that love never dies. It just changes homes. She signed it softly. Forever yours, Elena. When she finished, she didn't fold it or seal it. She simply placed the letter in her Bible. Right beside her favorite verse, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. She closed the book gently, whispering, "It's finished." The daisies were in full bloom, and the morning light danced on their petals. She took a deep breath, lifted her face to the sky, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for teaching me how to say goodbye without losing love." A soft breeze stirred, the kind that carries whispers from heaven. And in that stillness, she felt Michael's presence, not haunting her anymore, but blessing her. That afternoon, she spoke at another grief retreat in Italy. Her theme that day was the power of release. As she stood before the audience, she said, "Letting go isn't erasing memories, it's freeing them. You can hold love and move forward at the same time. Healing doesn't mean you forget. It means you finally remember without breaking." The crowd was silent, tears glistening on faces from every walk of life. When she finished, they stood and applauded, not because she was strong, but because she was real. That evening, back in her hotel room, she looked out the window at the setting sun, pink, gold, and soft lavender melting into one another. It looked just like the painting she and Michael had once picked together for their living room. She smiled, placed her hand over her heart, and said, "We did it, love. We really did it." And just like that, Elena knew she was free. It happened on a Thursday evening in Paris. Elena was there to speak at a women's faith conference, her first international invitation since she started sharing her story. The event hall was filled with hundreds of women, all dressed in vibrant colors, their eyes reflecting the flicker of candles and hope. When she took the stage, her heart pounded. She wasn't nervous. She was alive. She smiled and began, "I once thought my story ended the day I lost my husband, but I've learned something beautiful. God doesn't end stories in ashes. He rewrites them with grace." The audience leaned in, silent. She spoke of pain, prayer, loss, and rebirth. She spoke of faith that survives fire and love that outlives death. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, some clapping, others weeping, others standing quietly with hands lifted in worship. It was more than an event. It was a resurrection. Later that night, as the music played softly in the background, one of the organizers, a cheerful woman named Amina, pulled Elena by the hand. "You've carried so much sorrow, my sister. Tonight, you must dance." Elena laughed nervously. "Oh, I haven't danced in years." But Amina smiled knowingly. "Then, tonight, you dance for the first time again." Before Elena could protest, she was swept into the rhythm, the sound of drums, laughter, clapping hands, and joyful music echoing through the hall. Her feet hesitated at first, unsure, but then something inside her broke free, the heaviness, the fear, the guilt of feeling happy again. She twirled slowly, then faster. Her laughter burst forth like sunlight, and as she spun, the hem of her dress fluttered like wings as though her spirit had remembered how to fly. The crowd cheered her on, chanting her name, and someone shouted, "Dance, woman of faith. Dance again." Tears mixed with joy as Elena lifted her hands toward heaven and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. You gave me back my laughter." The next morning, she walked along the Seine River. The city was waking, coffee shops opening, the scent of croissants in the air, the hum of life surrounding her. She watched a young couple laugh by the water's edge, and for the first time, she didn't feel that sting of loss. Instead, She smiled softly and whispered, "Love looks good on them." She sat on a bench and pulled out her journal. Its pages now filled with stories, prayers, and letters of hope. She wrote, "There is a time to mourn and a time to dance. I thought I'd never make it here, but here I am, breathing, smiling, alive. Thank you, Lord, for restoring my soul." She added a verse beneath her words. "You turned my mourning into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy." Psalm 30 minutes and 11 seconds, and she drew a small daisy beside it, her symbol of renewal. In the months that followed, Elena began traveling the world: Kenya, Brazil, India, Greece, South Africa, sharing her testimony with women who had lost hope. Everywhere she went, she saw the same glimmer in their eyes: pain, yes, but also hunger for healing. She would tell them, "You are not broken beyond repair. You are a masterpiece being restored by the Master's hands." And they would weep, smile, hug her, and say, "If you found peace, maybe I can too." One night, after another powerful conference in Lagos, she stood on the balcony of her hotel, watching the city lights twinkle like scattered stars. Her phone buzzed with messages from women around the world. She read one that said, "I buried my husband last year. Your story made me believe I can smile again. Thank you, Elena." Her heart swelled with emotion. She whispered to herself, "This is why I lived. This is why I stayed." She knew now that every tear, every lonely night, every ache had prepared her for this moment. God had turned her private pain into a public purpose. Later that week, she visited a small church in Nairobi. The pastor asked her to pray over the congregation. As she stood at the altar, she looked at the faces, old, young, broken, hopeful, and said, "I stand here not as someone who had it easy, but as someone who lost everything and found Jesus in the rubble. If he could heal me, he can heal you too." And when she began to pray, the Spirit moved, women cried, men lifted their hands, and the room felt drenched in grace. That night, as she returned to her hotel, she placed her hand over her heart and smiled. The ache that once haunted her was gone. In its place was peace, deep, quiet, beautiful peace. And as she lay in bed, she whispered into the silence, "I danced again, Michael. I danced again." A single tear rolled down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of gratitude, because joy had returned, and this time it was here to stay. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the world feel suspended between breath and eternity. Elena sat by her hotel window in Nairobi, the city lights flickering like a constellation below her. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the room, and her Bible lay open on the nightstand to Isaiah 61:3. To give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. She traced her finger along the verse, whispering, "You've kept every promise, Lord." Still, a small ache lingered, not of pain, but longing. She missed Michael, not with despair anymore, but with gratitude, like missing the sun after it has set, knowing it will rise again somewhere else. She turned off the lamp, letting moonlight pour through the window. And then, something strange happened. A sedan, breeze gentle yet strong, swept through the room. Though the windows were closed, the air grew still, heavy, sacred. Elena's breath caught. She knew this feeling, the presence. Her heart raced as she whispered, "Lord, is that you?" Then, she felt it, a warmth wrapping around her like a soft embrace, the same way Michael used to hold her when words failed. And in that silence, a voice, not audible, but deep in her spirit, spoke. "You have done well, my daughter. You carried the pain with grace, and through your tears, others found me." Elena's eyes flooded. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed, whispering, "Thank you, Jesus, thank you." The presence deepened, and then, for the first time in years, she saw him, not as he was in the hospital, but radiant. Michael stood before her, clothed in light, smiling, the kind of smile that once melted her fears away. She froze. "Michael?" He didn't speak at first, just looked at her with eyes full of peace. Then he said softly, "You did it, Ellie. You kept your promise. You lived. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I miss you every day. He nodded gently. And I've never left. Love doesn't die, Ellie. It just changes its form. Her lips trembled. Are you happy? He smiled brighter. That familiar, boyish grin. Happier than you can imagine. Heaven is more beautiful than words could ever say. And you, he pointed at her heart. You've made heaven proud. She covered her mouth, sobbing. I didn't think I'd survive this. He stepped closer, his form glowing faintly, and whispered, You didn't have to survive. You just had to surrender. And you did. A warm light enveloped them both. It wasn't goodbye, it was peace. Then he said one last thing. His voice, like music, keep dancing. Ellie, every time you do, heaven celebrates with you. The vision faded slowly, leaving behind a golden stillness. Elena remained on her knees, trembling, tears soaking the carpet, but her heart felt lighter than ever. She whispered into the quiet, I will, Michael, I'll keep dancing for both of us. And as she stood, she looked toward the horizon. The first light of dawn was breaking, soft pink and gold spreading across the sky. She opened the balcony door, letting the morning breeze kiss her face. The city below stirred to life. Car horns, laughter, vendors calling out. Life was moving again, and so was she. She smiled and said, Thank you, Lord, for speaking back that morning. She wrote in her journal, Grief is love that hasn't found its voice yet. But when heaven speaks back, that love turns into peace. She closed the book, placed her palm over it, and whispered her final prayer. For every soul still waiting for heaven to speak, may they hold on, because one day, in ways words can't explain, heaven will. If you've ever lost someone you loved, the world doesn't stop, it just becomes quieter. Every place, every scent, every song holds a memory. You learn to breathe again, slowly, painfully, and somehow beautifully. Grief isn't something we escape. It's something we learn to walk with. It bends us, but it also teaches us how deep love really goes. Because the truth is, when heaven calls someone home, it doesn't mean the story is over. It just means the story continues on a brighter side of eternity. Elena's journey reminds us, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering with peace. It means learning that love never dies, it just transforms. So if you're listening right now, maybe your heart is still aching. Maybe you're still waiting for heaven to speak back. Hold on, dear soul. The same God who caught every one of Elena's tears is holding yours too. And one day, you'll smile again, not because you've moved on, but because you've moved forward. Until then, live, laugh again, dream again, dance again. Because those you've loved, they live on through you. This story is dedicated to every heart learning to heal, to every tear that carried a prayer, and to every soul brave enough to say, I'm not okay, but I'm still standing. Thank you for watching When Heaven Called Home. If this story touched your heart, don't walk away silently. Leave a message below for the one you miss or for someone who might need this reminder tonight.